This woman's name is Harley, and at 32 years old, she discovered that doing everything right after making the worst mistake of your life sometimes still isn't enough. Her husband Bennett agreed to take her back after she was unfaithful, but he refuses to guarantee he'll stay forever. And that uncertainty? It's slowly destroying her from the inside out. I'm Emma, your storyteller here at Mrs. Emma, and today I'm sharing a raw, complicated tale about betrayal, consequences, and the painful reality that forgiveness doesn't always mean restoration. This is Harley's story, told in her own perspective. What happens when the person you hurt most gives you a second chance but keeps one foot out the door? Let's find out. As Harley and Bennett approached their one-year anniversary since what everyone referred to as Discovery Day, the moment Bennett uncovered her affair, things had actually been progressing quite well for several months. They had made the mutual decision to discontinue marriage counseling because, surprisingly, those therapy sessions were causing more harm than good. Every single appointment left them feeling worse than when they arrived. They would enter the counselor's office feeling reasonably okay, only to emerge wanting to tear each other apart. When Harley finally suggested they stop investing money in something that was actively damaging their relationship, Bennett readily agreed. The relief they both felt was enormous. For months following that decision, they genuinely enjoyed each other's company again. They functioned as a team. They laughed together. They rediscovered the friendship that had been buried under layers of pain and resentment. Everything seemed to be slowly returning to some version of normal. Harley allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, they were going to make it through this nightmare intact. But then came the vacation that would expose the cracks beneath the surface. Bennett and Harley planned an elaborate 10-day vacation with their 3 children, 11-year-old Landon and 8-year-old twins, Alexis and Quinn. The trip cost a small fortune, and Harley had envisioned it as a turning point for their family. A chance to create beautiful memories and prove they were healing together. Instead, it became a pressure cooker that revealed everything still broken between them. The children were absolutely dreadful throughout the entire trip. Constant whining filled every moment. They fought with each other over the smallest things. They showed zero appreciation for the incredible experiences their parents were providing. Harley recognized with painful clarity that her children had been spoiled terribly, and this expensive vacation was showcasing just how entitled they had become. Bennett attempted to manage the children's behavior, but something fundamental had shifted in him since the affair. Before Harley's infidelity, he would have simply tolerated everyone's bad behavior, swallowing his frustration and keeping the peace. But this version of Bennett was different. He had developed boundaries. He refused to accept being treated poorly by anyone, including his own children. His patience had vanished. When the stress of the trip intensified with the children's constant misbehavior, Harley found herself slipping back into her old coping mechanisms. When frustration built up inside her, she directed it toward Bennett. She always had. It wasn't something she did consciously to hurt him. It was simply her automatic response to feeling overwhelmed. The difference now was that Bennett no longer absorbed her negativity without reaction. Instead of just accepting her harsh words and critical tone like he had throughout their marriage, he withdrew. He became distant and cold. He repeatedly stated that he would not return to the toxic patterns of their previous marriage, which Harley interpreted as him constantly throwing her past mistakes in her face. The week leading up to this catastrophic vacation had been Harley's 40th birthday, and that milestone had been profoundly disappointing. Bennett was consumed with managing the children, handling all the packing, and dealing with pre-trip logistics. There was absolutely no intimacy, no romance, no special attention. It was her 40th birthday, a significant moment in any woman's life. And Bennett couldn't find it within himself to make her feel cherished. Instead, it passed like any ordinary day where everyone else's needs took priority over hers. This situation reminded Harley painfully of their trip the previous January, when Bennett had ended up hospitalized due to an accident. When he recovered and they returned home, they had an explosive fight. Harley, exhausted and defeated, told him she was done trying. This happened only 4 months into their recovery process. She was already feeling like nothing she did would ever be sufficient for him, like his expectations were impossibly high and constantly shifting. When they returned home from the disastrous vacation, a massive emotional chasm had opened between them. Communication became forced and uncomfortable. Every interaction felt awkward and rehearsed. Harley suggested that instead of buying more material possessions for Christmas, since the children were clearly already drowning in privilege, perhaps they could plan some kind of meaningful experience as a family instead. Bennett immediately rejected this idea. He stated bluntly that he had no desire to invite additional stress by planning another trip with children who behaved like ungrateful brats. His refusal stung, but Harley understood his reasoning even as it frustrated her. The weeks that followed were a roller coaster of ups and downs. Bennett would occasionally mention trying to plan something special for Harley's birthday in the spring, attempting to make up for the disappointment of her 40th. But then, in the next breath, he would suggest she celebrate with her sister instead of with him. What kind of husband encourages his wife to celebrate her birthday without him? When Harley expressed how hurtful that felt, Bennett's response shattered her. He admitted he was anxious about making plans months in advance because he honestly wasn't certain they would still be together when that time arrived. That confession opened the floodgates. Harley became vulnerable with him, sharing how terrified she was of this constant uncertainty, this feeling of standing on unstable ground every single day. They both cried. Bennett apologized for not investing more effort into their recovery. He said he wanted them to be together, that he was committed to trying. For approximately 2 weeks following that emotional conversation, things improved dramatically. They were affectionate again. Physical intimacy returned. They felt connected and aligned. Thanksgiving was lovely, and Harley dared to hope they were finally making real progress. Then everything collapsed again after a single conversation that Harley still struggles to comprehend. One morning after dropping the children at school, Bennett and Harley went out for breakfast together. When they returned home, they were cuddling comfortably in bed, and Harley decided to be completely honest about what was truly bothering her. She told him she was struggling tremendously with the fact that he always maintained this escape route, this readiness to leave her at any moment. She tried to explain that it made her feel like he was simply using her as a placeholder until something better came along, like she was being evaluated constantly and could be discarded the moment she failed to meet his standards. Bennett insisted he didn't have a backup option waiting. He apologized but stated firmly that the possibility of leaving had to remain on the table because of what she had done. He explained that if she cheated again, or if their marriage reverted to the dysfunctional patterns that existed before her affair, he would not stick around and accept misery like he had for years. Intellectually, Harley understood his position. Emotionally, however, it felt like living with a loaded gun pointed at her head every single day. Since that devastating conversation, an invisible wall had materialized between them that Harley couldn't penetrate no matter what she tried. She attempted to plan activities for her upcoming birthday, but Bennett would only agree to staying local and keeping celebrations small and simple. When she pushed for something more elaborate, he would explain that he couldn't make plans months in advance because he was terrified she would leave him. The contradiction drove Harley absolutely insane. He claimed he couldn't commit to future plans because he feared she would abandon him. Yet simultaneously, he sent her countless articles and posts about marriage recovery and faith-based relationship advice. He wanted her to know he was working on their relationship, but he refused to actually commit to anything concrete or meaningful. Harley felt like she was walking on eggshells constantly, wondering if every disagreement or difficult day meant Bennett was mentally preparing to leave. He wanted her to promise she would never cheat again, which was obviously a promise she could make. But he refused to promise he wouldn't leave under any circumstances. He kept emphasizing that if their marriage returned to its previous toxic state and he became unhappy, he would not tolerate it anymore. She understood he needed boundaries after what happened. But this dynamic where every argument made her wonder if he was packing his bags was absolutely exhausting. She wanted to provide him with safety and security, but she desperately needed some security herself. Living in constant fear that one bad day or one fight could end her marriage was unsustainable. Following that awful conversation where Bennett essentially confirmed he was keeping one foot perpetually out the door, everything between them started feeling artificial and performative. Harley could recognize when someone was merely going through the motions with her. Bennett would be affectionate and say appropriate things, but there was always this underlying tension, this sense that he was constantly evaluating whether she was performing well enough to deserve his continued presence. What really began bothering Harley was how Bennett monitored her moods and reactions to everything. If she had a difficult day at work and was somewhat irritable when she arrived home, she could see him mentally taking notes. If the children were driving her crazy and she raised her voice, He would get this particular expression on his face like he was thinking, "Here we go again, the real Harley emerging." It felt like living under constant surveillance, being watched and judged endlessly, with Bennett waiting for her to mess up so he could say, "See, this is exactly what I was afraid of." Harley started sending him articles about marriage recovery and genuine forgiveness, hoping that reading about how other couples successfully worked through infidelity might help him realize how unreasonable he was being. She found numerous stories about wives who had affairs and husbands who truly forgave them, who moved forward without holding past mistakes over their heads forever. She discovered excellent faith-based content about releasing the past and choosing love over fear. But Bennett barely acknowledged any of it, which honestly felt like he wasn't even attempting to work on his own issues, his own inability to truly forgive and move on. The birthday planning became this strange test between them. Harley would bring it up every few days, asking if he wanted to research restaurants or perhaps plan a weekend getaway. He always found some excuse to avoid making concrete plans. He would say things like, "Let's see how things develop," or "Maybe we should wait a bit longer," which basically meant he still wasn't certain he wanted to be with her in a few months. But then when Harley became upset about being unable to plan anything for her own birthday, he would turn the situation around and accuse her of being unreasonable for wanting guarantees about the future. Harley started paying extremely close attention to his phone usage and his behavior, searching for signs that he was already emotionally checked out, or perhaps even communicating with someone else. If he was so prepared to leave her, maybe he was already lining up his next relationship. When she would ask him about his day or who he had spoken with, he would become defensive and accuse her of being paranoid. But how was she supposed to not be paranoid when he had literally told her he might leave at any time? During this entire period, Harley admits she started testing him somewhat. If he was going to leave anyway over small things, she wanted to know where the line actually existed. So when he annoyed her or did something inconsiderate, she would react the way she normally would instead of constantly walking on eggshells. If he left dirty dishes in the sink after she had cleaned the kitchen, she would comment on it. If he was late getting home without sending a text, she would express her frustration. These were completely normal relationship interactions that every couple deals with regularly. But Bennett would respond to these ordinary moments by pulling away emotionally. He wouldn't fight back or defend himself like he used to. He would just become quiet and distant, which somehow felt worse than arguing. It was like he was already practicing for life without her, simply disengaging instead of working through problems the way married people should. Harley tried explaining to him that this entire dynamic was making her feel like she was dating him instead of being married to him. Marriage is supposed to be about unconditional commitment, for better or worse, in sickness and in health. But he was treating their relationship like some kind of probationary period, where she had to continuously prove herself worthy of his continued presence. When she pointed this out, he would say she was the one who had broken the unconditional trust, so now they had to rebuild it slowly. But how are you supposed to rebuild trust when the other person won't even commit to the rebuilding process? The worst part was how he would use her past mistakes against her in subtle ways. If she got frustrated about something completely unrelated to their marriage, he would get this look that said, "There's the real Harley coming out again." If she wanted to make plans or purchase something for the house, he would hesitate, like he wasn't sure they would be together long enough for it to matter. Every single interaction felt loaded with the potential for him to decide she wasn't worth the effort anymore. By this point, Harley felt like she was married to a stranger who was simply waiting for her to give him a reason to leave. The man she had married would have fought for them, would have been committed to working through problems together. This new version of Bennett felt like he had already moved on emotionally and was just waiting for the right moment to make it official. Everything finally exploded over something so ridiculous that Harley still cannot believe it ended their marriage. They were having a perfectly ordinary Saturday morning. Bennett was making coffee in the kitchen. Harley was getting the children ready for their activities. Just regular family routine. Landon started complaining about having to go to his friend's house because he wanted to stay home and play video games instead. Harley told him he needed to keep his commitment and stop whining about every single plan they made for him. Bennett jumped in and started undermining her parenting, saying, "Maybe we should let Landon stay home since he seems really tired." Harley pointed out that they couldn't just cancel plans at the last minute because their child decided he didn't feel like doing something anymore, and that this was exactly the kind of inconsistent parenting that made their children so spoiled and difficult. Instead of supporting her like a partner should, Bennett became defensive and said she was being too harsh. So Harley reminded him that these were the same children who ruined their expensive vacation with their constant complaining. And maybe if they actually followed through on consequences once in a while, the kids would learn some respect and gratitude. That's when Bennett completely lost control. He said this was exactly what he had been afraid of. Her going right back to taking her frustrations out on everyone around her and turning every small disagreement into a character assassination. He said she was doing the same thing she did before her affair, making everyone else responsible for her bad moods and using criticism to control situations. Harley couldn't believe he was bringing up the affair over a simple parenting disagreement. She told him he was being ridiculous and that normal couples have different opinions about discipline without it meaning anything deeper. But he just looked at her with this cold, detached expression and said he wasn't going to live like this again, constantly walking on eggshells around her moods and having every family interaction turn into a criticism session. When Harley tried to explain that she was just trying to be a good parent and teach their children some responsibility, he said it wasn't what she was saying, but how she was saying it, with this angry, contemptuous tone that made everyone around her feel attacked. He said he had forgotten how exhausting it was to live with someone who always had to be right and always had to make other people wrong to feel better about themselves. Harley was completely shocked that he was making such an enormous deal out of nothing. She said he was overreacting and that if he couldn't handle normal family stress without threatening their marriage, maybe he was the one with the problem. That's when he said something that still makes her angry when she thinks about it. He said he would rather be alone than spend the rest of his life feeling like he had to manage her emotions and protect their children from her moods. Bennett started making phone calls that same day, to his lawyer, to his brother about staying there temporarily, to the children's schools about changing pickup arrangements. Harley couldn't believe he was being so dramatic over one argument. When she tried to talk to him about it, he said this wasn't about one argument but about a pattern that he could see was never going to change. Harley called her sister and her mother, expecting them to be outraged at how Bennett was acting. But they both seemed hesitant to take her side completely. Her sister actually said maybe some space would be good for both of them to figure things out, which felt like a betrayal when Harley needed support most. Her mother suggested maybe Bennett had a point about her tone sometimes being harsh, which was the last thing she needed to hear. Some of their mutual friends were even worse. When Harley explained what happened, they would listen and nod, but wouldn't automatically say Bennett was wrong. A couple of them actually said they understood why he felt like he needed to protect himself, which made Harley realize that maybe people had been discussing their marriage behind her back all along. The final conversation Bennett and Harley had before he moved out was him trying to explain that he had given their marriage everything he had for over a year, but he couldn't keep living in fear of her next bad mood or criticism session. He said he loved her, but couldn't sacrifice his own mental health and their children's emotional well-being to prove his commitment to someone who wasn't willing to change fundamental things about how she treated people. Harley told him he was breaking up their family over normal marriage problems, and that if he really loved her, he would be willing to work through difficult periods instead of running away the first time things got hard again. But he said this wasn't the first time. It was the same pattern that existed before her affair, during their recovery, and now again, which proved to him that nothing was actually going to be different. When Bennett packed his things and left, Harley felt completely abandoned and betrayed. After everything she had done to rebuild their marriage, after all the effort she had invested in being the wife he wanted, he was throwing it all away over one parenting disagreement. She couldn't understand how someone who claimed to love her could be so cruel and unforgiving, especially when she had already been through the humiliation of confessing her affair and begging him to stay. Sitting in their empty house that night, looking at the children's confused faces when they asked where Daddy went, Harley felt like the victim of Bennett's inability to truly forgive and move forward. He had strung her along for a year, making her think they were rebuilding something real, when really he was just waiting for an excuse to leave with a clear conscience. 3 years later, Harley can honestly say that Bennett leaving was the worst thing that ever happened to her, but probably the best thing that ever happened to him. The divorce took 18 months to finalize because Harley fought him on everything: custody, support, division of assets. She wasn't going to make it easy for him to just walk away from his responsibilities to her and their family. But Bennett had been documenting everything. Apparently, he had recordings of her losing her temper with the children, screenshots of texts where she had said things she probably shouldn't have, even a journal where he had been tracking her mood patterns throughout their reconciliation. His lawyer painted her as this unstable, emotionally abusive person who used manipulation and anger to control her family. The judge bought it completely. Harley ended up with the children every other weekend and Wednesday nights, which feels like she lost her own children because Bennett convinced everyone that she was somehow dangerous to them. The worst part is watching them choose to be at his house even during her scheduled time. They make excuses about homework or plans with friends, but she knows they just prefer being there because Bennett has created this calm, peaceful environment that they think is better than being with her. Bennett got promoted at work about 6 months after their divorce was final. Apparently, when you're not dealing with a difficult wife at home, you have more energy to focus on your career. He bought this beautiful house in a great neighborhood, got the children enrolled in better schools, and basically built the life Harley thought they were working toward together. Except he did it without her. The real knife in her heart came when she found out through the children that Bennett was seeing someone. Her name is Rachel, and she's a teacher he met through Alexis's school. The children talk about her like she's amazing. She bakes with them, helps with homework, takes them to do fun activities. Apparently, she's patient and kind and never yells at anyone. They've been together for almost 2 years now and just got engaged. Harley has had to watch from the sidelines as her replacement creates the happy family that she should have had. The children prefer Rachel to her now, which they don't say directly, but she can tell. When they come back from Bennett's house, they talk about family game nights and weekend trips and all these wholesome activities that somehow never happened when she and Bennett were together. It's like Rachel brings out this version of Bennett that Harley never got to see. What makes it worse is that everyone loves Rachel. Harley's own parents ask about how she's doing when they talk to the children. Their old friends invite Bennett and Rachel to parties and gatherings that Harley isn't included in anymore. Even people who were supposedly her friends have decided that Bennett deserves happiness more than she deserves loyalty. Harley found out last month that they're expecting a baby together. A baby. Bennett gets to have the fresh start and growing family that they were supposed to have, except with someone who apparently doesn't have any of Harley's personality flaws or emotional problems. She had to hear about it from Quinn, who was excited about having a little brother or sister, which felt like the ultimate betrayal. Harley's own life has been a disaster since the divorce. She moved back in with her parents because she couldn't afford rent on her own place after Bennett stopped paying spousal support. Dating has been a nightmare because men her age are either divorced with their own baggage or they're single for obvious reasons. The few relationships she's tried to have ended quickly once guys realized she comes with a lot of drama and 3 children who don't particularly want to be around her. Work has been difficult too because she doesn't handle criticism well, and apparently that's a problem in professional environments. She's had to change jobs twice because of conflicts with supervisors who didn't appreciate her direct communication style. It's like everyone expects you to just accept feedback without defending yourself or explaining your perspective. The final insult came when Bennett and Rachel sent her a wedding invitation, like they wanted to rub it in her face that he found someone better than her and is ready to make the same commitment to her that he wouldn't make to Harley. She didn't go, obviously, but she heard from multiple people about how beautiful the wedding was and how happy they looked together. Harley spent that weekend looking through old photos of Bennett and her from when they were happy, wondering how everything went so wrong. They had good times too. They loved each other. They built a family together. But apparently none of that mattered once he decided she was too difficult to live with. He gets to erase their entire history and start over like she never existed, while she's stuck dealing with the consequences of his abandonment every single day. The hardest part is that everyone acts like this is somehow Harley's fault. Like she deserved to lose her husband and kids and house because she had some personality flaws that made her challenging to live with. Nobody talks about how Bennett gave up on their marriage, how he refused to truly forgive her, how he strung her along for a year just to leave anyway when things got difficult. Harley looks at her life now, living with her parents at 35, seeing her children every other weekend, watching her ex-husband build a perfect life with his perfect new wife, and she wonders how this became her reality. She did everything she could to save their marriage after her mistake. She went to counseling. She tried to change. She begged him to stay. But it wasn't enough because Bennett had already decided that she wasn't worth the effort anymore. Sometimes she thinks about that baby they're expecting, and she hopes it keeps them up all night crying. She hopes Rachel realizes what it's really like to be sleep-deprived and stressed and see if she's still so patient and understanding then. But knowing her luck, Rachel will probably be one of those natural mothers who handles everything perfectly, just like she handles everything else in the life that should have been Harley's. Bennett got to walk away from all their problems and start fresh with someone new, while Harley is left picking up the pieces of everything he destroyed when he decided she wasn't good enough anymore. But sure, everyone thinks he's the hero in this story, and she's the villain who deserved everything that happened to her. That's the real injustice. Not just losing everything, but having everyone believe it was justified. And that's where Harley's story ends, or rather where it continues in a reality she never imagined for herself. As I sit here reflecting on this journey, I can't help but think about the complexity of human relationships, forgiveness, and accountability. Harley's perspective shows us one side of a painful story about what happens when trust is broken and the long, difficult road of trying to repair it. The truth is, relationships after betrayal are complicated. They require both people to be willing to change, to communicate honestly, and to rebuild on a foundation that's been shattered. Sometimes, even when both people want it to work, the damage is too deep and the patterns too ingrained. What do you think about Harley's story? Was Bennett wrong to leave, or was he protecting himself and his children from a toxic dynamic? Is there such a thing as trying too hard to save something that's already broken? These are questions without easy answers. If this story resonated with you, please take a moment to like this video. It helps more people find these important conversations. Share it with friends who might benefit from hearing Harley's experience. And most importantly, subscribe to Mrs. Emma so you stay updated and never miss the stories we share here. Remember, every story has multiple perspectives, and understanding all sides helps us navigate our own complicated relationships with more wisdom and compassion. Until next time, this is Emma, reminding you that sometimes the hardest stories to hear are the ones we need most. Thank you for listening.